Let me begin by acknowledging where I am today. I'm honored to be on Treaty 7 land in southern Alberta, home of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina First Nation in the Stoney Nakoda. Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta Districts 5 and 6. And if you'd like to share a land acknowledgement, I encourage you to do so in the chat. Anyone in our audience who would like to do so, please go ahead. Here's how our program will run today. In just a moment, I'm going to introduce our guest speaker, and she's going to share with us her thoughts about what she's learned on today's topic, and then we'll open the floor to some questions from you. We're going to have you put your comments in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. And we'll finish off the hour with a few words from Magda Gomans, who is the manager of CCECanada. With that, let's just get on to the program. Let me now introduce you to Dr. Sandra Smeltzer, Associate Professor in the Faculty of Information and Media Studies at Western University. Her areas of research and publication include critical pedagogy, community-engaged learning, experiential learning, and the ethics of activist research with a focus on communication and media studies. She holds a Shirk Inside grant and 4 university-based grants, all focused on experiential learning, and she coordinates the community-engaged learning placements at Western's Faculty of Information and Media Studies. She's been awarded the University Students' Council Teaching Honor Roll Award of Excellence for every year she's taught full-time at Western, and she's a 2-time recipient of the Faculty of Information and Media Studies Undergraduate Teaching Award. She was awarded Western's inaugural Humanitarian Award, named one of Canada's top 25 most influential women by by Women of Influence magazine, and awarded one of Western's top newsmakers. Dr. Smeltzer recently served as an Assistant Dean Research at the Faculty of Information and Media Studies. It's called FIMS, so I think from here I'll call it FIMS. That's a lot shorter. And she's a Moore Institute Fellow at the National University of Ireland. On November 3rd, Dr. Smeltzer hosted a day-long workshop of over 100 faculty, staff, students, and community partners on the topic of community-engaged learning and well-being, and that's what she's going to talk about with us today. It's pretty clear that the movement in community-engaged learning in higher education is growing, with more and more students being offered opportunities to engage in projects developed collaboratively with community partners and for mutually beneficial outcomes. If these projects are done well and facilitated in an ethical manner, hang on. If they're done well and in an ethical manner, I've lost my place, I apologize. CEL can provide students with an opportunity to undertake deep, meaningful, and collaborative learning, and by critically combining theory and practice. Students can hone skills, gain professional experience, nurture their personal agency, and feel that they are making a difference in the lives of others. These activities can therefore help bolster students' mental health and overall well-being. However, there are some downsides. CEL is not accessible to many students for a range of reasons. The process may also encourage students to view themselves as precarious labor, and the experience can be distressing if they encounter systemic inequities, injustice, and the wicked problems of contemporary society. There's significant literature about the rise of mental health crises throughout our campuses, particularly in the wake of the global pandemic, as well as the expanding role played by CEL endeavors in higher education. However, there is a lack of critical attention being paid to the relationship between CEL and mental health, especially the impacts on community partners. So some key questions that Sandy has been considering include: what resources should be provided to community partners who co-mentor and co-educate CEL students? How can or should community partners address and foster students' overall well-being? What responsibilities do institutions have to support the well-being of community partners? Sandy believes that by creating conversations about the challenges associated with facilitating and engaging in CEL, we can collectively find ways of supporting students to productively address difficult encounters and emotions without overburdening community partners. I've said a lot. I think maybe we should listen to Sandy now and hear what she has to say. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Sandy Smeltzer now. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Betty. I feel like I don't even need to do her talk anymore. That was so great. I appreciate it. What a lovely introduction. And thank you for the invitation to be able to speak to you all today. As Betty said, community engaged learning is, according to the definition that we use here at Western University, a praxis-oriented pedagogy that sees students engaging in projects developed collaboratively with community partners for mutually beneficial outcomes. In many contexts, CEL is referred to by other terms, including community service learning and service learning, terms that, to be honest, I have some concerns with that I can discuss in the Q&A if anyone is interested. But notwithstanding these sort of inconsistencies of terminology between and often even within institutions, this unique form of experiential learning is incredibly labor intensive. For a CEL to be ethical, several criteria need to be met, including but certainly not limited to, it must be developed and executed in conjunction with community partners as collaborators and co-educators, recognizing that they bring to the table expertise, experience, and significant labor. Building these relationships, of course, takes significant time and energy and a real commitment to reciprocity. The process must also be thoughtfully intertwined with relevant curriculum. We know that theory informs practice, and hands-on experience can provide students with greater insight into what they learn inside the classroom. Students must, of course, engage in meaningful activities during their CEL experience, and they must be provided with continuous mentorship and support from their institution throughout the process. An in-depth and authentic reflection should, by all accounts, serve as the bedrock of all CEL endeavors. One-on-one and class-based reflection practices really provide students with the tools and the dedicated space to help them interrogate the relationship with systemic forms of inequities and can play a critical role in fostering students' personal agency. Well, I'm highlighting all of these labor issues, which are really just the tip of the iceberg, not to say, oh, woe is us who coordinate and facilitate CEL, but to emphasize that it requires significant material and immaterial institutional resources to be done right. Additionally, much of this labor is hidden care work, which has racial, gender, and other intersectional implications. Today, I want to especially highlight something that I've talked about a couple of times in Canadian forums and recently in European forums, and that is the significant work required to promote and protect students' mental health and well-being when they participate in some type of community engaged learning. This talk is partially based on primary and secondary research conducted during and after the pandemic in Canada. First, it includes semi-structured interviews with 27 faculty members and staff members at 7 Canadian universities, as well as focus group discussions with 2 sets of undergraduate students. Second, this year, with the help of 4 paid students, we examined experiential learning websites of 80 publicly assisted universities in both French and English throughout Canada to explore what kinds of CEL they offer, if they offer it, where it's housed in their institution, if they have dedicated staff, and what type of language and rhetoric and communiques do they have to define and describe the kinds of programming that they offer. Third, I conducted semi-structured interviews by phone, Zoom, or Teams with 16 faculty and staff members from 14 universities to discuss where they envision CEL going in the future at their institution, and what do they want to see, what are their current challenges, etc. Now, out of all this research, it has become very clear to me that experiential learning is on the rise throughout Canada, and CEL in particular is expanding rapidly throughout the country. And there's a strong desire to address CEL-specific issues. In particular, individuals express a need for avenues to share research, to share resources, and to share wise practices aimed at supporting students' mental health and well-being before, during, and after their CEL experiences. From this research, combined with lots of anecdotal chats and discussions at conferences, etc., came the CEL and Wellbeing Workshop that Betty mentioned that we hosted at Western on November 3rd of this year. The goal of the workshop was to bring together individuals who coordinate, who facilitate, and who participate in CEL. What we wanted for this workshop was to foster conversations that would be critical, open, honest, and premised on a shared understanding that students may encounter a wide range of experiences during their CEL activities that can have both beneficial and detrimental impacts on their mental health. Although many individuals commented on the mental health needs of CEL instructors, such as myself, facilitators, as well as community partners, which is obviously very important and something that I have co-written about, my focus here today is on students' mental health and well-being. A key thing that individuals said to me in my research, as a preface to my next slide, is that their institution has a bit, and sometimes a lot, of mental health supports for students when they go abroad for some type of international form of CEL, but that they don't have intentional resources for local domestic CEL. And yet the issues that a student may experience doing CEL, just down the road, can be equally, if not more, challenging. Because on the one hand, CEL can positively impact students' mental health through meaningful community engagement. As a graduate student commented in one of my interviews, quote, "I think it's really, really good for students' mental health and their wellness to see that the work that they do matters," end quote. Indeed, we know that some students will feel empowered by working with community partners for the betterment of society and feel that they're making a positive difference in the lives of others. Students may also reduce anxiety about their future job prospects and post-graduation lives, especially as they enter a labor force increasingly marked by economic injustice, and if they, like what happened to me, amass large student loans. CEL can also bolster students' professional confidence and their personal agency, and it can play a critical role in helping students to manage what I might call emotional and cognitive dissonance stemming from curriculum that grapples with the many ills of contemporary society. As an undergraduate student commented in one of our focus group discussions, their placement afforded them an opportunity to, quote, "finally get to do something with what I had been learning. It was what I really needed to do emotionally. It made me less depressed about all the things I was reading about," end quote. Another undergraduate student said this, quote, "I like doing something, other than more essays and going to class, but that's still useful. Honestly, it keeps me busy and that's good for my mental health. I know I'm lucky. I don't have to have a job. Doing my placement at X organization makes me feel like I'm doing something that's good for me and keeps me out of trouble," end quote. However, on the other hand, CEL can negatively impact students' mental health, especially if they lack supports to productively manage difficult encounters and emotions. For example, students may feel disheartened by the inequities they encounter in their experience. It may be the first time a student has really seen up close the impacts of systemic injustice in their own backyard. Or the placement may be distressing for the parallels to their own life histories, their experiences, or those of a loved one. Some students find that their placement it reveals that the problem that they had hoped to address is too wicked, too challenging, too complicated, too entrenched for them to make a real difference, especially within the condensed time frame of an academic semester. Importantly, for a lot of reasons, significant swaths of the university population feel that they cannot or unable to participate in CEL. And if they do participate, many also confront hidden curriculum within and beyond the classroom. As one student commented, and I quote, "I didn't think I could do an internship or service learning or whatever. I didn't get how the whole adult office world works. I didn't even have the right clothes," end quote. As equity and inclusion are intimately intertwined with mental health and well-being, I would argue that they always need to be our starting point. Students may also find it difficult to reflect upon their own subjectivities, their own positionalities, their own biases. As Kari Grain and Darren Lund argued, CEL can be emotionally fraught when participants find themselves questioning, quote, their own ontologies, ethics, and ways of knowing. Indeed, students can find it distressing if they have, quote, come to realize that they may have behaved in oppressive ways or unfairly benefited from or been disadvantaged by an inequitable system, end quote. Attending to these kinds of complex emotions has become increasingly important, as we all know, in the aftermath of the pandemic, together with shifts in the geopolitical landscape and the impacts of climate change, among other major issues. Also, I believe strongly that we must not only tell success stories of CEL. Understandably, when I show students in my third year and my fourth year classes the promotional videos produced by my institution, the first reaction is, wow, I want to do CEL. I mean, that's the intention, to get more students doing CEL and to get excited by it. But when I ask them to critique the videos, they often comment on just how great it looks. And after they finish their CEL placement in their fourth year, some can then talk about how their experience, or maybe their friends' experience, didn't really match the kind of exciting, frontline, change the world, transformational images that they saw in the videos. So I would argue that we need to be honest about what CEL experiences might entail. Circulating only feel-good stories of friction-free personal transformation can be harmful to the goal of preparing students to effectively manage their expectations and their encounters. Indeed, a success stories only approach, I would argue, reduces the meaning and the gravity of their experiences, and it can strip students of the opportunity to experience CEL in all its entirety. As Corey Shetter writes, an inescapable language of success permeates service learning, or what I'm calling community engaged learning. Words such as goals, outcomes, demonstration, growth, celebration, or achievement populate service learning literature. Strategies are designed with success in mind, as they should be, and words associated with problems are intended to be solved. When problems enter into conversation, it is implied that students will work out these issues on their own, ultimately coming to a place of growth, resolution, or success. So, although we want to focus on the journey, which allows students to, I think, lean into the challenges, they can often find this difficult because of the perceived need to, quite understandably, focus on the end grade, which is what they've been taught their entire academic careers, or other tangible outcomes, often at the expense of the process. This, as an important side note, kind of pushes up against the utilitarian performance-based approach to the neoliberal university activities, and I would argue it should. I therefore find myself aligned with the work of Grain and Lunn and their critical hope perspective that recognizes and embraces, as they say, quote, the necessary tension between criticality of privilege, charity, hegemony, representation, history, and inequality, along with a hope that is neither naive nor idealistic, but that remains committed to ideals of justice, reflexivity, and solidarity. Critical hope. Students, when I describe that to them, that is something they go, yes, I can see those two things working together. They are not mutually exclusive. So in the CEL and Wellbeing Workshop, which we've mentioned, which we hosted on November 3rd of this year, we wanted different ways of trying to capture the most pressing critical hope concerns of the attendees. And one of the ways we did that was through a dotmocracy. So we put up 11 large posters around the main floor of our building that kind of served as the landing spot for the workshop and where we had the food and the coffee, you know, the important things. And we gave people 3 Post-it notes to kind of vote on the issues that they wanted to hear more about, they wanted to think more about, they wanted to talk more about, and they were encouraged to write a line or 2 on these Post-it notes. From this dotmocracy, here are the top 3 things attendees voted on. Without question, the number 1 most popular area was the need for additional research on the relationship between CEL and Indigenous ways of knowing and learning. As one attendee wrote directly on the paper outside of the Post-it notes, quote, when we talk about decolonization, indigeneity, and CEL, and our university curriculum in general, we're talking about transformation and reframing how we think about learning in a broader sense. We need to do that way, way better, end quote. Other Post-it notes refer to the fact that much of the CEL readings that we have, our in-class discussions, stem primarily from a Euro-Western paradigm and the embedded ideologies and ways of learning that come with it. The second most popular issue was community partner needs and challenges, which included comments about the importance of ensuring that community partners are, as one person wrote, quote, well-equipped to mentor and support students' mental health. Another attendee wrote, quote, "We need greater respect for the work community partners do. We need to work together to create meaningful, reciprocal relationships," end quote. And the third, which is very much connected to the second one, is institutional responsibilities and support. In particular, attendees expressed concern that universities are not earmarking enough resources to ensure that CEL is facilitated in an ethical and productive manner. Most attendees expressed concern that the labor-intensive nature of CEL was not recognized, that building trust-based relationships with community partners and with students takes time and energy. And numerous posted notes expressed concern that this work should not fall on the shoulders of precarious labor. In my penultimate slide, I want to briefly show you the CEL website that accompanied the workshop. So we launched it on October 21st, and as of this morning, because I started to check all the time, we had 1,304 visitors to the site. The overarching goal of this website is to create a kind of collaborative forum to share resources and wise practices with the broader CEL community, certainly here in Canada, but also internationally. So we have a homepage that includes upcoming events. And if you go to it, you'll see that we've put up the keynote plenary video from the workshop, which include 5 incredible women from across the country. A literature page, which you can see kind of a screenshot here of, and that includes scholarly literature, grey literature, journal titles and their links, as well as some guides and tips, a specific section on mental health and well-being resources, and a section on reflection resources. We also have a contributions page form, so you can add any sort of content that you want to the website. So if you're watching this, you can click on the QR code on the screen, or you can go to the URL, which is www.cel-resources.ca. So why do I think this site is important? Well, currently there is no centralized CEL network in Canada. So long-term, my goal is to expand this site for it to become a national collaborative forum for folks to share and to contribute resources, promote upcoming events, and connect with others in the community. And I'm excited to say, as of yesterday, we just received $5,000 in additional grant funding from my faculty to build this site out even more. And finally, some recommendations. I would argue that universities need to develop CEL-specific pathways to mental health resources. One way to do that is to consciously connect experiential learning units and wellness units on our campuses. So when I was doing my research across the country, I looked at every single kind of Ontario university, and I couldn't find anything where it was clear that you had experiential learning units and wellness units working together. As one undergraduate student said in my focus group, quote, "There may be various resources for mental health on our campus, but the noise surrounding this can be overwhelming for students. Students need resources that are specifically catered towards experiential learning and immediately available to help ease anxiety," end quote. So at the workshop, we had Western's Director of Wellness and Wellbeing offer some opening remarks about the importance of connecting these units. And we had an amazing nurse with mental health expertise support the development of the workshop. Her knowledge was invaluable. I am not an expert on mental health and wellness. I may have read about it, but I'm not an expert, and she is. Together, we can help provide students with the support that they need. I also recommend establishing an ombudsperson position for CEL, someone who students can talk to who is not their academic supervisor or their placement supervisor. And finally, as we tackle the weighty question of how we can help ensure that CEL is ethical, accessible, inclusive, and really geared towards a la Amartya Sen, Martha Nussbaum, and their capabilities approach, helping students find pathways to the lives and the livelihoods that they, not me, that they have reason to value, we must always foreground the intersectional barriers impacting many students' ability to participate. So thank you for listening to my talk. And thankful to the incredible Amala Poli, my colleague, for helping me with the slides. And I'm very happy to take any sort of questions.
Thank you so much, Sandy. Really interesting. I mean, one of the things that stood out for me when you were going through your presentation was it never occurred to me that when we prepare to send students out into the world, into international experiences, there's clearly a protocol that takes place to prepare those students to go into these international destinations. Why would we not have something in place for students who are going down the street to a community organization to help them be better prepared to walk into that? And it just had never occurred to me until you said that we don't do that. We just, maybe it's, I mean, do you think, is it because we assume that because it is just down the street, we have a better understanding of what that situation is going to be?
So when I didn't talk about it in this talk, but I think it's a really good question, Betty. I was interviewing faculty and staff, and that is exactly what a lot of people said. There is an understanding that when you go abroad, because this used to be my original research, I was looking at the ethics of sending students into a variety of different international placements. And this really came about I was working in Southeast Asia, and I was placing a lot of students with a variety of nonprofit and community-based organizations, specifically in Malaysia, but as well as Singapore, the Philippines, and Thailand. And I was sending a student to work with the Southeast Asia Press Alliance in Bangkok, Thailand. And while that individual was literally en route to Bangkok, the coup hit in Thailand. And I thought, oh my goodness, am I prepared? Yes, I am. I have all these things ready to go. I knew who they had to contact. We had kind of a whole plan set up because they were going to Thailand. But that's big. But then I can have a student 2 weeks later go down the street to an organization that we have here called My Sister's Place. And they came back and said, I can't continue doing this. It's a day shelter for women in our city experiencing very difficult circumstances. And they came back to me and said, I didn't know how hard this was going to be. I can't do this. I need a different placement. And it was that moment I was like, yes, I had all these things in place for this young individual going to Thailand, rightfully so. But this individual over here, I didn't have anything. And I was caught off guard. And it was as if that light bulb went off in my head and goes, how do we not have more of those kinds of things? And so, I knew how to get them to the right place. I knew how to get them to the right resource, but I hadn't done anything proactive. I hadn't really talked about all the challenges they may encounter. We hadn't really had a transparent, open discussion of what they might experience potentially in that placement. And I really had, honestly, a deep, deep sense of guilt that you can't fully prepare somebody, but I hadn't actually really tried to do it. And I think the other thing I want to say to that is it doesn't have to be something as traumatic as that. I have had students go somewhere working with an environmental organization in our city of London, and they've come back and they found it incredibly difficult because it really seemed for them overwhelming, the environmental climate change situation. And although it may on the surface appear to be a sanitized kind of placement with an environmental organization, it was incredibly challenging for them at this really deep, I want to say almost existential level. And because they didn't feel like in the amount of hours they had, they could really make a difference. And I think they're just gonna put their hands up and say, I can't do anything. And this is where we have now conversations about critical hope. That yes, we can understand the political and the economic, social cultural realities that we live within, but also have the ability in our agency to somehow make some sort of difference. And putting those things together and having language for it, I think really helps students be able to move forward. I know I'm talking a lot, but Betty, I think that is the key reason why I'm doing it, because it doesn't seem as big of an issue for a lot of people in upper administration in our institutions. And I would say that is incredibly important as we see experiential learning ramping up, and we seem to be wanting to just send out more students into the community. You just can't do that. There's a lot more that needs to be done that is very labor intensive to do it ethically.
Well, and as you said, combining that CEL office with a wellness office and sort of collaborating on preparing students for both pre and post activity outside of the university setting is kind of critical and something that's missing. You said you didn't see that anywhere, but is it happening at Western?
Yeah, well, we're starting to do it at Western, because she may be on the call right now, I don't know. Amanda Jansen, who's an amazing mental health nurse here at our institution, and the directors, Dr. Sonia Malone, and bringing together them and our head of our experiential learning office and saying, okay, yeah, we need to do this. So we're starting it. And so part of me wanting to do this and having that website is to give other people the language so they can say the same thing at their institution, if that's what they feel is necessary. So we're certainly starting it, and our experiential learning folks in our centralized office are the most incredible people, and they're very much on board and supportive and thoughtful and critical. But I also know that community engaged learning happens all over campuses and in schools, programs, departments that could be happening in ways that they don't know about, I don't know about. And so part of it's also kind of a bit of raising the flag that you do need to think about this. And if you need help, come to, a centralized office, ask somebody where I can get resources instead of feeling that you have to do it all on your own.
Right. Really interesting. Please, by all means, people, put your questions in the chat. We'd love to take them. We've got a couple that have already come in, so I'm going to toss them at you, Sandy. Let's start with the first one. How do you incorporate knowledge mobilization into the student experience?
Well, I think there's a couple ways perhaps to answer that. That's a good question. In my 4th year CEL class, we kind of get around the table with some tea, coffee in my case, and we workshop on how to translate students' experiences onto their CVs and onto their resumes. I think because a lot of times students do something incredible in their placement, and they don't always think about how to put that onto a resume or how to put that onto a CV. And so as a group, we talk about language they could use that would be productive and concise and succinct and important for their CVs and their resumes, whether they go into a job or graduate school or whatever. So that's an important form of knowledge mobilization that I think is often missing. Instead of just saying, I did a placement here. Well, what did you do there? What kind of skills did you build? What did you increase their social media traction by 80%? Did you, produce this specific type of research or whatever it is? Also, I am lucky as a faculty member that I have the capacity to also hire students. So I hire at least 2 CEL students every summer to work as research assistants, so they can put research assistant on their CVs or their resume, but we also co-present and we co-publish our work. We just finished doing a series in my faculty recently together, and we are co-publishing a peer-reviewed journal article. That to me is really important because that's also students as partners in the entire research process and knowledge mobilization, so they can see it through the entire process. That's key. I also invite students to co-present in this our faculty's seminar series, which is kind of like a low stakes forum for knowledge mobilization, very supportive space, but it really provides students with the experience of being able to present their research. Some of my colleagues, she may be on here, for example, Sarah McLean from the Schulich School at Western, and Nicole Campbell, they do incredible work in terms of e-portfolios, which I think is really useful for a number of different disciplines, that students can take their CEL work and put it into their e-portfolio wherever they want to take that afterwards. But one thing I would like to do that I have not done, and I'm thinking a lot of how this would play out, I was going to model it on the City Studio. If anybody knows City Studio, we had in London, it's temporarily on pause in London, but we started doing it with them. Some type of semester end or year end presentation from students who were in CEL placements as a form of knowledge mobilization. So they can present to the peers in their class. But also on our campus, we have a CEL community practice, which I think has 62 faculty and staff members in it, but hosting some sort of kind of lunch and learn where CEL students can present their work. That for me would be a really important form of knowledge mobilization as well. Those are just some ideas of things that I'm doing and things I would like to be able to do. That year-end thing, I think, would be really valuable. Also, for students have an opportunity to kind of put the words in their own mouths to describe what it is they're doing. So if they go into a job interview, or if they're telling their aunt Beatrice what it is that they do, or they're telling their peer over in another faculty, or they're in a grad class, they can say, here's what it is. I think that being able to articulate it is an important form of knowledge mobilization that they can use later on in other types of contexts.
Sure, each time they share their story, they become more confident and able to articulate what's happened to them and what their experience has been.
Absolutely, I think so.
Magda, I can't see the chat. Magda can, and Magda, you have a question from the chat box?
Yeah, in our Q&A box, which is where you're welcome to post questions as well. Someone has posted one, so a little bit of a connection to what was just spoken about perhaps as well, but moving in a different direction. So the question is, what tips do you have to help students build confidence in their ability to support community organizations? I work with many students who want to get frontline experience, but are intimidated because they don't want to make a mistake when working with communities facing real challenges.
I think that's a really fair, it's a really good question. Well, one of the things that we've been doing, and for me, it is a highlight of my 20 years at Western, is we, myself and Molly McCracken, who is an incredible a part-time instructor at, she's a lecturer at Western, and she was also our career services officer. And we have a course which is called Theory Meets Practice. And I do kind of the critique, the theory of the ethics of experiential learning. What is community engaged learning? What are the challenges of nonprofits? How do we do CEL and experiential learning writ large within the confines of the neoliberal university? What are accessibility issues, inclusivity issues? It is really all the kind of theory side. So students have that critical part of the critical hope. And then she does this, I'm going somewhere with this, the hands-on kind of, how do you build a resume? How do you network? How do you build your LinkedIn? So kind of real concrete things, which is incredibly important for students and their confidence. And what we do, and I think this is really important, is we do mock interviews, we do mock discussions. So we kind of play the role of what it would be like if you were in your placement. And then students kind of get to experience that almost in real time, this role playing, really important way that I think has been incredibly important for building their confidence. The other thing I would say is I am a huge fan of Clifton Strengths. I will admit that when I first saw Clifton Strengths, it wasn't something I was all that keen on, and I was 100% wrong. If you haven't had a chance to bring Clifton Strengths into your classroom or into your unit, I would highly recommend it, because instead of working on a deficit model of what students need to improve on or add to or learn or gain, it builds on their strengths. And it allows students to articulate what their strengths are. So we use Clifton Strengths as kind of an anchor for outcomes. And I ask students to complete an assessment at the start of their CEL journey. And we're very lucky to have a Clifton Strengths expert on our campus, Megan O'Hara, to support the process. And considering that reflection, and this kind of also answers the question, is really the bedrock of all types of CEL, having students think about their assessment before and after the placement can provide them with, I think, really valuable insights into their own personal strengths, and it can build confidence in their ability to be able to support community organizations, to say, I do have these types of things to offer. I am a leader. I am a gatherer. I am somebody who is able to do this. And they learn about this through the Clifton Strengths process, and then reflect upon it, so that it really helps for them to say, I realize this is kind of an area that I can be, I say, of use, but of use to a community partner. The last thing I say to answer that question, and I think one of the other questions that we also have, is that students don't necessarily need to have frontline experience. And I understand that desire for it, but it kind of goes also back to the comment I had of not everything needs to be frontline. As we know, nonprofit and community-based organizations and networks, there's a lot of back office work. There's a lot of mundane work. There's a lot of things that may not seem all that exciting, but are still incredibly important and allow students to get insight into the entire process, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and is supportive to an organization in all sorts of capacities. So allowing students to get some frontline experience, certainly understandable, but it doesn't have to be only that. And I say that because when we look at the kind of, to go on, create an incredible article by Radin and Harrison, where they talk about the kind face of the university and the promotional videos of this transformative, service learning and community engaged learning process. There really is kind of a push that it will be this front line. And the students think that if they don't have that, then they've done something wrong, that it isn't good enough, that it isn't something they can put on their CV or their resume or tell their Aunt Beatrice what they've done. And of course, then that leads to greater intimidation because the stakes become higher. So if we can lower that to say, you can have some of that, but not necessarily. Other stuff is important too. I think it just kind of lowers the anxiety, because I certainly see my students in my class go, oh, how am I going to, do all of this? Does that, you think, answer the question? And then Betty, please, you jumped in, Magda too. You know this as well as I do.
I can see where that would be intimidating, right? I mean, they don't know what they're walking into, and if they feel like everything they're going to do is frontline work, there are two possibilities. There's either that feeling of intimidation, or if it ends up that they're doing that background work, that's maybe not what I think it needs to be shared, that might be a possibility of what they're getting into. I mean, they really need to fully understand the pieces that might be expected of them before they go into a situation, and so yes, it can definitely be challenging.
And to go with that too is I recently had a placement with a really emotionally challenging, like I can't even talk about it. And the student really wanted to do this, but we had an open, we sat around a coffee table, myself, the student, and two members of the community partner. And we said, this is what it could look like. Here's where it could be quite traumatic. You need to know this. And it's okay if this is something that does not fit with what you would like to do. It's okay. And really it's not just giving a student an out, but to say, we experience the challenges as 50-year-old people working here. You don't have to do this. And the student really wanted to, but they went into it with very open eyes, with a real strong sense of what this was going to entail. And there's the openness, there's the transparency with what you said, Betty, so they don't walk in not knowing what's going to happen. The other thing I would say about that is I had a guest speaker come into my class, and we were talking about the fact of my son. He sometimes likes to know what something's going to look like before he walks into it. And we were talking about the Children's Museum here in London. And he was a bit anxious about how big this place was. So we actually took out the floor plans and we walked through it online before we went. And then we walked through the entire place together. And then he was able to stay for camp. So there is really to walk through what it would look like. Allows students to have all of the information that they capable at that point of knowing what it would look like. Same as my son, because then he can say, now I see it, I can make a choice, and then I can consciously choose to come to this camp. I don't know what I would have done if he'd said no, because I wouldn't have been able to work because he would have been home, but you know what I'm saying.
Visualization took place and enabled him to be able to do that. So again, I think that comes back to that whole idea of that situation that you just described, sitting down with the community partner and the student, that maybe there's a role in there for, again, that office that brings the experiential learning and the wellness people together in one place to have that conversation, to prepare the students for what and some will be more difficult than others, obviously. Some are going to be more emotionally challenging, some will be more intellectually challenging, and for them to go into it having a better idea of what they're walking into is obviously critical. Yeah. There's a question here about language, which is kind of interesting. How do we support students who face language barriers? This person works with many international students and Anglophone students who are not fluent in French, so I'm guessing they're in Quebec, to participate in community service, client-facing roles, or even fully participate in the organizational team conversations. What do we do for students who are challenged linguistically in any circumstance or context?
Well, I think kind of going off the things we were talking about before, I think first and foremost, an open dialogue and transparent communication is needed before placement, so that students are very open about their capacities and their capabilities, and community partners know what to expect from a student. I mean, it's not a big surprise to say that oftentimes, I look at the resume of a student and I see the resume and it doesn't always match the student that I know. And so making sure that there is a fair match is an important step moving forward. And that the community partners really also know what the student is like and to meet them and understand their capabilities and their capacities. So I think first and foremost, open, transparent communication dialogue is critical for CEL, hence the labor-intensive nature of this kind of work. But as an example, to make it a little bit more concrete, I currently work with a student who I'd say their third or maybe their fourth language is English. And they wanted a placement for their CEL that would help them improve on their writing in English. And I understand that, absolutely. But after a lot of discussions, I had to really think about what possibilities of the 82 local nonprofits and community-based organizations I work with in and around London that I could match them up with. And when we sat down with a community partner, we realized probably the best thing that they could do was that they could work on internal communication. They're doing a specific thing internally that would be a little bit more low stakes, so they could build and improve on their writing skills, and their supervisor in the placement was kind of helping them. And then I said I would also help provide a little bit of writing support there, but that was still in a low stakes sort of way. And then for the more public facing work, this student is going to be engaged in social media work. So, and that's really important because the organization kind of wanted to have more traction on specific social media platforms. So that was very reciprocal, because then they provided something for the organization, and they were gaining something from the organization. They were providing things that the organization needed, while also getting greater mentorship and support from the organization. So that sounds slightly transactional, which I really try to move away from transactional language when I'm talking about CEL. But it worked well because we sat around the table again and had an open chat about, with me, the student, and the community partner, to make sure that we're all on the same page. Because I worry deeply about putting additional burden on community partners who have very clearly said, a lot of them, we are overwhelmed.
Yeah. We
would love to be able to have a student. We believe strongly in this, but I'm not sure we can do the things that you need us to do. And the language coming out of institutions often is unidirectional. We will send students off and look, you get free labor, but it's not unidirectional, because community partners play a lot of work in the process. So again, transparent communication. But again, I would also say that CEL doesn't always need to be client facing. It doesn't need to be citizen facing. It doesn't necessarily need to be public facing. And I've been really thinking a lot more creatively about possibilities of other kinds of work that is still extremely valuable to nonprofits. And this is not just in terms of language barriers, but a variety of intersectional accessibility issues, like neurodivergent individuals who don't feel that they want to or can or be citizen facing for whatever reasons.
Right. Well, and talking about the community partners, we do have a question up here in the Q&A, and it says, maybe on the new site, there can be a place for community partners to sign up to work with the institution, ask questions, collaborate with others, build community collaboratively. Then they can direct it when they want community partners in the ways how they would work it and how they would find it valuable and helpful as well. So sort of introducing that piece that would involve community partners to the CEL site.
Yeah. Vanessa's brilliant. She has a PhD in education, and she does looks at the community partner perspective, especially in international community engaged learning. And that's brilliant. Yes, Vanessa, we're doing that. Amla, we're on it tomorrow. We just got the funding, so we can. So I think that's exactly what we need to do, and then make sure that actually gets out to community partners in a way that's of value to them. And it's interesting that having that comment there, Vanessa, because at the workshop, we invited some community partners, and we had a panel about community partners, and they were incredible, wide range of community partners on the panel, very, very powerful. And they all said, we're tired of you institutions telling us community partners how this whole relationship is going to work. So can we have forums where we come to you and tell you what we need instead? And also, who are you on campus? Because it's very complicated and convoluted how the institution works. So, yeah.
Well,
So go ahead.
there seems to be this constant, what we hear at CCECanada is this constant reminder that the relationships have to be reciprocal.
Yeah.
They have to be authentic. They can't just be for the sake of matchmaking, I guess, for lack of better words, and giving a student an experience. It really needs to be beneficial to all the parties involved.
That is exactly right, Betty. And I'm going to be really blunt here. When I started kind of working more in this area many years ago, what I was seeing is kind of forums for staff. And understandably, there's certain pressures on staff to put more bums and seats to match certain goals, and quantifiable goals of how many placements, how many hours, how many community partners, how many students, because that is the pressure coming from universities, certainly the pressure coming from, I can tell you about the Ontario government, I can talk about the strategic mandate agreements, the metrics for it with experiential learning right at the very top. There's a lot of pressures for staff members to put more bums in seats. And then faculty, they're over here often just critiquing, because our job is to critique and to challenge and to question. And I have a lot of colleagues who are fundamentally opposed to any form of experiential learning because this exploitation of student labor. This is not what the university is for. This is, feeding the labor force market necessities of a hyper-capitalist, landscape. And those two things were kind of siloed. So we're talking about community engaged learning, which is much more complex and much more challenging and so important if we want to have the university fulfill its mission, one of its missions for the public good. We need to have faculty and staff together. And that means we need to have community partners intertwined with those conversations. It's almost as if the university is like, community partners, we'll get to you when we figure things out. You just cannot do that. And bringing them into the conversation and starting with what is needed from the community is really kind of antithetical to that kind of performance-based funding, strategic mandate agreement, neoliberal, utilitarian strategies of upper administration.
Well, and I wanted to ask you about that and about leadership at post-secondaries, but I want to just remind everybody, we just got a few minutes left. So if there are any last minute questions, please pop them up into the Q&A and we'll try to get to them. But I wanted to ask you about, you talked about the role of post-secondary in that 2023 survey you did, that was the study with faculty and staff. Did that involve any level of senior leadership? Because one of the things that we hear, is that there is this drive at post-secondary institutions to build on the community engagement, no question about that. But whether or not the resources are there to do that and the capacity is there to do that is and to do it right is obviously one of the biggest challenges. So I just want to hear a little bit more about the study that you did, if you've got a couple minutes to share that.
Increasingly, upper administration, yes, they're listening. And one of the ways I'm doing it is by saying, look, it's in this, your strategic plan, it's in your mission statement. Do you realize this is right there? So can we talk about that thing? And I think the primary thing is for me in my non-scholarly side, my non-pedagogical side, but my political side is an education piece, because the things that we talk about here is I think, fairly obvious to us. We know this is labor intensive. We know how important this is. But for a lot of administrators, that isn't necessarily obvious to them. So when we kind of can lay it out and say, look at what this entails, if you want to do it well and do it ethically, and if you want to do this for strategic purposes, some of my colleagues might not agree with me on this, you do it for strategic purposes. Show how well you're doing it. Make this, ethical. Because I think a lot of them, it's never occurred to them that we don't just send students out and a placement's going to be thrilled to have them. And so instead of just getting mad that they don't do it well, I'd rather educate them and say, here's how we could do it better. Can I make recommendations to you? So I became assistant dean for a variety of reasons, but that was one of the main reasons, is that I could have access to upper administration in order to be able to kind of
getting their ears. Yeah. Okay, we've got a couple minutes left, but there's one more question from Kristen at Brock that just got snuck in. She's curious as to how your work may reflect smaller or perhaps just lesser known partnerships or efforts at other institutions. How have you been able to connect with other faculty members at other universities, post-secondaries? How might you be sharing or connecting on this with others? Apologies if I've missed mention of that. I'm thinking specifically of my previous experience. This is Kristen speaking. Working with McMaster as part of the United Way Halton and Hamilton's Connect Ed program.
Well, I think I'm hoping, like, by creating some sort of national network that will allow us to be able to have those greater connections. But also, I mean, I'm not necessarily a pitch for this, but we were at CEL-Canada, which is the incredible national organization for co-op and internship, work integrated learning. And it had kind of a smaller subsection, which had originally been called service learning, then community service learning. And then the last CEL-Canada conference, we decided, myself and Sarah King from the University of New Brunswick, to do a community practice for community engaged learning. So if anybody who's on this call is not part of that community practice, let me know, and we can kind of add you to it. Because CEL-Canada, in terms of internship, work integrated learning, is kind of infiltrated in every institution. So to be able to use the network that's already there and really be able to target community engaged learning folks and say, hey, come into this community practice as part of CEL, and also come to, the network that we're trying to build, that would allow us to kind of get to some of, I hope, some of the smaller and perhaps lesser known kind of work that people are doing. Because what I'm finding is a lot of people are doing a lot of incredible work in isolation. They're doing, I talk to people and they're like, yeah, I'm doing this and this, it's really hard. And I'm like, oh God, well, let's have a chat. Let's, because I think people really want to know that what they're doing matters, and that there are other people who are trying to do similar important work.
And this has been the big challenge, finding those people who are doing that work, and by building what you're starting, I think is, that's the step in the right direction. No question about that. We have come to the end of the program. Unfortunately, we could probably go on for quite some time, but I'm going to toss it over to Magda Gomans, our manager from CCECanada, who did jump in a couple of times, and let her close out the program if she would.
Thanks, Betty. And thank you so much, Sandra. I really appreciated this. I actually had a few questions of my own, so I'll ask you a little bit later, or maybe I'll send you an email. But such an interesting talk, such an interesting experience you draw on with the workshop that you supported and developed at Western. And yeah, I would definitely love to hear more. So we'll chat some more later.
Please.
But yeah. I just wanted to let all of you know who's attending. Thank you so much. This talk today was part of our campus conversation series. And with this series, we aim to sort of bring in, just as the name implies, that academic, that campus perspective on community campus engagement. I know that within CCECanada, our top priority is always supporting community efforts to do this work, supporting community-driven partnerships. And, it definitely becomes more and more clear to us over time that really bringing in that campus perspective helps to enrich experiences around those reciprocal, those authentic relationships that do ultimately prioritize community and place community front and center in this work. And so I really appreciate this, Sandra. It was wonderful. The Campus Conversations series is a complement to our Community Voices series, which we hold at various points during the year as well. And touching on some of the things that were said here today, actually, one of the events that we have planned for 2024 for our Community Voices series is to really invite community partners to join an event, more of a discussion event than a presentation, really, and let people know about within CCE Canada. We have some plans that we're bringing together for, a tool for community partners to connect with each other across the country, but to connect in and learn how at various institutions they can be a part of these partnerships. And so we're planning an event where community partners can sort of let us know, we'll let them know what we're thinking in general terms about a tool that may be useful for them, and then hearing from them about what they'd like to do. And yeah, so that's one of the events we're having on the horizon, as well as various other campus conversations events as well. The last thing I'll just say is I'll ask all of you to save the date. We're having a CCE Canada annual gathering on Tuesday, February 27th. I believe it's going to be from 12 to 2:30 Eastern time, and our whole network across the country is invited. You can join for as much or as little of that as you wish. And we'll be speaking about, what we've been up to, some things we have planned on the horizon. We're going to have a panel of individuals who have participated in community campus partnerships to speak about their successes, tell us about their needs as well. And then we're going to devote a large part of that event as well to having you all be able to sort of let us know the kinds of supports that you need and to connect with each other and hopefully through that kind of event, enrich the supports that we can provide across the country for all of you. So I'll just close out by saying thanks again to all of you who were able to attend. Thanks again to Sandra. And if you have any questions about anything, you can contact us at CCECanada.ca. That's info@CCECanada.ca. Or you can always look at our website at CCECanada.ca. Anyway, thanks so much, everyone, and we'll see you next time.